Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't. Don't take it, don't.
And so we have our next Mark up after that, Mark Taylor, and he will be speaking to us today about psychedelics and chi. So we'll be getting his slides up and enjoy.
Hello, I'm Mark, and I run an organization called Patient-Led Oncology. I'm not a doctor, so none of this should be deemed medical advice. My background is in finance and technology, and I had a cancer scare about 6 years ago. And it looked a bit like this. It was a bit of a weird situation, one that's probably going to happen more and more in the world, where I had some lesions in my pancreas, elevated tumor markers, but the biopsy was inconclusive. And the doctors told me just wait and watch and see what happens. But if anyone knows pancreatic cancer, it can be quite scary. So I wasn't willing to just wait and watch. So I got a circulating tumor cell test, and it came up positive. And I then went to my doctor and said, look, I've got lesions in my pancreas. My tumor markers are elevated. I've got circulating tumor cells. Can I get treatment? And he said, no, you need to wait until the biopsy is verifiable. So I went further. I got the DNA analyzed, and they looked at the DNA of the cancer, and it confirmed it was likely pancreatic cancer. And I started searching for surgeons that would treat me. And I was speaking to a Harvard-trained surgeon, and he said to me, look, I don't recommend surgery, but don't tell anyone I told you this. But I've seen alternative cancer treatments work in some cases. You may want to look into it. And I went from being a skeptic into a furious researcher into integrative oncology. And then I set up this organization to try and find data in a world that doesn't have data. And my journey was like this. I went from clinic to clinic. When you enter the experimental space, you're not dealing with doctors who've passed standard training. They've all trained themselves. And I'd go to one doctor, they would do one thing like high-dose vitamin C. I'd go to another doctor, they were doing cancer vaccines, another doctor that was doing mRNA gene silencing. And I'd travel the world, partly out of panic and trying to save myself, but it became almost an obsession of like, wow, what is out there that we don't know about? But the trend was like this. I would get a response at a clinic, and then the cancer would come back, my markers and circulating tumor cells. I'd go to another clinic, and it would come back. And I saw about 20 doctors around the world. And by about the 10th doctor, I realized that each doctor had a speciality that they were good at, but a huge blind spot. And along this journey, I came up with the concept of patient-led oncology to try and capture all the data from all the doctors using a patient network and then selling it back into the doctor community. So we're basically a research aggregator now. And this was my journey, but it wasn't working. And this is what I see because I track patients, and I see this a lot where you get a response, and people must know this from the cancer world. It keeps coming back, the cancer. And as I was going along the way, actually, one of the first oncologists I said to me, just get on with your life and forget about it. And it was very hard to do. And then other people started saying, do trauma work. And I didn't know what that meant. And I was like, I don't have trauma, I have a fine. And then as I started spending more and more money and realized I was going to face bankruptcy if I didn't find a solution, I started doing meditation, Joe Dispenza things, trauma work, and then suddenly everything calmed down. And so this talk's going to be not so much about the first part, but what I found moving from conventional doctors into alternative healers. I met shamans from all around the world, energy healers, breathwork instructors, body workers. And it's more about my experience along that way. So this is the organization we run. I look at oncology from 4 lenses. One is myself. I do literally anything I can find that's crazy, I'll try. I have a Facebook group with 5,900 members, and we all share information about what we're doing. And then increasingly, I'm working with healers and doctors, and I share information to them, they share information to me. And then what I realized along the way, pretty much all the time I could find clinical research justifying what we were doing. And actually, increasingly, we're becoming research aggregators for doctors. This is the team. It's myself and Gabrielle. We both got a mathematical bent in our history and finance. And we took cancer on as a mathematical problem. It's like, what would we need to do to treat cancer if it was a maths problem? And then along the way, we hired Dr. Jihan and Dr. Sohail to help us with some research. And this is the clinical side. I'll come back to this later. I know it's not so directly relevant to inner healing, but this is a summation of where we are now with what we feel is the optimal way to treat cancer, given looking at 2,000 studies. It's the trends in immunotherapy. If you look at all the studies, immunotherapy is starting to show promise increasingly as cancer vaccines are starting to enter the market. The main obstacle to checkpoint inhibitors today is immune memory, the ability for the immune system to see the cancer. With cancer vaccines, that's starting to change that pattern, and it's probably about 10 years away before that's in mainstream medicine. But there are other ways. In animal studies, ivermectin has been shown to do something similar and vaccinate the body. And then if we go around the circle, you've got the microenvironment of the tumor that you need to address. These are things that have had studies that show that need to be addressed to make the immune system attack it. You need to direct the immune systems to the tumor with chemokines. You need to deal with immune suppression. You need to show the antigens on the cancer cell. Checkpoint inhibitors are what you get in mainstream medicine. So if you go and see a doctor today in conventional medicine, you only get one of a few of these meds. You get one of this huge network that's required. And then you need to direct the immune cells to the tumor, and then feed the immune cells or with energy as they start to attack the tumor. And this is updatable. We're calling this the end game. It's 0.3. We're updating the version as we research. And soon there'll be a book published, and we're going to offer this as an open source to the public and to doctors to update and say, is this correct? Is there any problems with it? Can you find things that we've not found? Okay, that's the technical side. Now I'm going to go into the woo-woo consciousness stuff. So going to take, this is my journey of like how I work. So I did an online conference, and I at the end of the podcast, one of the guys said, "Yeah, Mark, you wouldn't believe this. I did a Vipassana retreat, and my PSA markers fell. I'm not on any medication." And I was, oh, that's interesting. And I'd seen a similar thing with myself, so I started doing some research. And I go online, I just look for cases, and I found this case of this. Can't pronounce her name, Amara, and she was living in Burma, quite poor, stage 2 ovarian cancer, couldn't afford medical treatment, literally went into a monastery to deal with it with Vipassana meditation. Stage 2 tumor disappeared, and then she went back to her life running a wood business. It came back stage 4, she went back into the monastery and then cleared the cancer. She now lives in the monastery. This is me with the shaman of the Noki Khoi tribe from Brazil. And as I meet healers, I try and have a conversation with them. I try and understand what they do, how they do work. I quite often, as a skeptic, I don't tell them about my situation. I say, this is what I do. I'm a cancer researcher. And this one, there was an interpreter who helped facilitate the conversation with me and the shaman. And I said, look, I'm interested in the concepts of cancer. What do you do in that space in the jungle? And she said, well, he happened to treat my mum. She had cervical cancer. He treated my mum, and they used a combination of a poisonous toad called Cambo, ayahuasca that both the shaman and the patient was taking, herbs and rest, and her cancer was cleared. So I'm like, wow, that's fascinating. I had a healing session with him, and I didn't tell him what I was doing, and it was a surreal experience, very hard to explain when you're in a situation high on ayahuasca. And but he correctly identified my pancreatic region and started massaging it and doing strange sounds around it. So there was something he knew that was beyond cognition. And then I look online and I say, well, what's going on? Is there any case studies to verify what's going on? And I found this case study of a complete response to using Cambo. Now, I don't recommend, this is this poisonous frog. I don't recommend going out and doing it. It's a sensitive thing. Be cautious. But this patient refused chemotherapy. It was quite a serious situation. And after 2 doses, they were clear for 4.5 years. My journey's taken me along many paths. I wanted to pull the highlights to me. This was me in northern Thailand a few months ago, studying Qigong. I didn't know what Qigong was at the time. I just went out of interest. And this, to me, pulled together all of the insights I'd got from the earlier stories, but also from case studies. When I speak to a lot of patients and they tell me about their situation, I see a lot of patients try all sorts of diets and juicing and off-label drugs and wacky things. But the one thing that surprised me was those that were using in a direction of their consciousness, whether that's visualization, prayer. And it was learning Qigong that taught me the mechanisms of what I think's happening. I didn't know what Qigong was. I don't know if anyone else does. It was what I would say effectively a Chinese version of shamanism. It was taught in two modes, one in monasteries where it was a monastic skill trait taught. And then there was a shamanic wisdom-keeping mechanism where a master passed on to another master, passed on to another master, and they served the local village. It has a lot of facets to it. It goes from sexology to energy work to psychology to spirituality. It navigates many things, but one of the things I was surprised about, within a few days, this lady Marissa, who's an expert in clairsentience, was getting us feeling energy in other people and getting us to mold and transfer energy within people, including ourselves. And it was fairly easy to do under a guidance of a master. So we were literally, people were identifying pains by going inwards, and people were trained to pull and transfer energy within people. And this is Mantak Chia. He runs a school in northern Thailand where he teaches a lot of this stuff. And then in Mantak Chia's place, I met someone who said, I'm studying it for cancer, and he said, you need to read this book. So this is a story from an American guy who worked in a Chinese Qigong hospital before they were closed. And in China, they were treating people with Qigong decades ago. And this is a documentary of what he was seeing in the hospital. And there was literally a test that a Qigong master was given, where they presented 3 cells, one that the Qigong master had to make smaller, tumor cell, one they had to make bigger, and a control. And that's how they passed one of the tests to become a Qigong master in the school. And I'm told, I keep having these conversations, I'm told there is even someone in America practicing this if you look. So what is Qi? Energy. In yoga, they call it prana. When you start studying it, there's subtleties to it. One of the realizations myself in going through this journey is that myself, I was historically very much a mind person. I used to exist, my consciousness exists as if the world was a mental dialogue. Now, I'm not sure this is everyone, but I had a specific case which I'll talk about. But that's how I perceived the world. But as I started doing all this alternative stuff, new parts of me started opening up. What's called the energetic body. If you start doing work, you start feeling. And you start feeling the world as a vibrational energy. And then as you get more sensitive to it, you realize that there's some power and knowledge and intelligence in that energy. There was a Shaolin monk who gave a talk at a Tai Chi class I went to. And he said this advice. He says, one of the problems with society today is we're running away from the Qi. But if you sit with the Qi guides you. And I think that's a very useful term for cancer patients to be aware of, because this is what I observe from the typical cancer patient and me as well. When you understand the energetic body, there's this concept of stagnant Qi. We Westerners, I think the closest definition we have is trauma, but there's a lot more subtlety to stagnant Qi than just what we associate to trauma. We all know trauma as someone who's abused as a child or someone who's in a war. We all have cognitive awareness of what that is. But what we're not aware of how much is stuck within us, that's there, that we're not conscious of. And I track people doing psychedelic retreats, and I'm always interested to hear what came up. Psychedelics are a very, what appear to me is a very effective way of uncovering what's hidden within us. And I'm always shocked, and the patients are shocked when I hear people who do it, and is that you wouldn't believe it. I had no idea, but the pain of a divorce from 20 years ago came up that I hadn't processed. Or a miscarriage I had 15 years ago came up that I wasn't aware of, and that they were carrying this pain with them. And then if you look at the studies, in animal studies, they're showing that this passes through 7 generations. I haven't found the research to understand why, but there's a perceived view that this is coming through us energetically, possibly from an interaction in the womb, possibly some higher forces. But in China, and I started digging into this because I had a quite extreme situation myself, which I'll go into. And in Chinese medicine, they believe this is one of the causes of cancers, and at least a contributor. Not saying it's the cause in all cases. If you're spending too much time in the sun or smoking too much, there's other rationales as well. But I think it's one thing that patients aren't doing enough of, and also aren't receiving guidance to do it effectively. Western medicine is catching up, though. So I don't know if everyone's read these books. They've been two big bestsellers. The Body Keeps the Score is a book by the professor in Harvard on trauma. So he's the world leading expert on trauma. And he's documenting, saying, look, there appears to be a very somatic component of trauma within the body, kind of articulating what they're highlighting in yogic circles and shamanic circles. And then if anyone's read Radical Missions, it's a book of, again, a Harvard, I think, master's study where she studied 1,000 radical remissions. And she identified these 9 patterns that led to those radical remissions. And I follow people who do this, and the releasing suppressed emotions comes up. But what I realize is we don't collectively in Western society know how to do this well. So this one to give an example of myself. So I was someone who thought they weren't traumatized, but I had a weekend with a therapist doing different trauma modalities, and MDMA was a core part of that. But what I did process some quite big emotions in the therapy, like quite 90 minutes of sitting in an energetic state of releasing something. But then subsequent to the trauma, what started coming through when I was in a relaxed state, when I was either running or getting ready for bed, was within me, memories of what felt like being strangled in the womb came up. And I remember some vague conversations about a complicated birth. I messaged my mum and said, was I wrapped in the umbilical cord? And she said, yes, you were. And it was quite a traumatic birth. And I've had somewhere in the region of 400 hours of this sensation to process. So it's not scientifically proven yet, but there's a view in a lot of these spiritual worlds and shamanic worlds that anything you don't process fully, you store in the body to be felt later. From myself and from others I speak to, I think what we don't have in our Western world are mechanisms to tap into that pain. One of the realizations I had in that space is that in order to start feeling the pain, you need to turn off the mind. And what I sense happens is that the consciousness goes where there is least pain. So if your body's in pain, your consciousness goes into the mind as a safety spot. And when you look at all the modalities, whether it's various bodywork techniques or psychedelics or breath work, it's all about deactivating parts of the mind in order to release the stuff that's trapped. But what are we doing these days? We're all running around on our phones. We're all keeping busy. We're all researching cancer, miracle cures. And I think the solution that we're missing out from, that I'm seeing from my research in patients that I see getting great results, are those that are able to connect into themselves with compassion. Now, I think that's the hard part. Diane gave a great story early on in, mentioning parts of her body and talking about them doing work for her. That is one mechanism of going in and starting to feel tumors in your body and not panicking yourself. There's something in Qigong called the inner smile, and it's going searching inwards, but with a smile. And when I did this, I did intentionally took this photo of me smiling, because actually while this stuff was coming out, I was not panicking. I knew what was happening, and actually I was quite intrigued, and I knew that this was only going to lead to positivity in my psyche after it had been released from my body. So if you can manifest a practice, there are teachers out there in Qigong or meditation techniques or in a psychedelic ceremony. It's all really about creating safety for you to feel and release. Okay, back to the science and why I bored you at the start on the science. So at our core, we are a research organization. So I was fascinating as to what's going on biomechanically within the tumor that responds to a positive emotional state or a negative emotional state. And this circle of immunotherapy that I talked about earlier, every single aspect is affected by the emotional state. So it's as if, you could argue that the tumor itself is a response to stress in some cases, as they're articulating in Chinese medicine. And then from what I'm seeing with visualization techniques, it's as if you're bringing the consciousness in a loving state to the tumor and sending love to it, that you're shifting the emotional state of the tumor. And at least making it more responsive to, in this case, it's an immunotherapy response. So, and this would be the same as taking 20 quite expensive drugs by just being in a positive emotional state. Okay, and then you go, what shifts emotional states quickest? And this is where it gets a bit weird, because all the illegal things that are banned from us seem to be working very well. So this is as a British psychiatrist who was interested in the effects of ayahuasca, and he went down to Peru with a shaman, and they've just run a clinical trial with 40 war veterans with complex PTSD. And in 2 weeks of treatment, 100% complete response to PTSD. And a single one of those cases would have been a radical case in the Western world. So what's the observation for cancer patients? So I tell this bit to patients who come to me for consults. I have strange conversations with patients where I work for quite expensive clinics that will do very advanced medicine. But like I said, the cancer will keep coming back unless your body's energetically fixed. And when I say to the conversation, maybe try meditation, I'm shocked when I hear, I'm not doing that, give me the name of the clinic and I'll spend my life savings. I'm shocked to see how difficult it is for patients to meditate. And I think there's a big gap in this world in helping cancer patients go inward and supporting patients through the pain, because I think a typical meditation technique does not cater for the fact that the trauma may need to come out in quite a strong, energetic way. And it's, if you study meditation, 7% of people who do meditate have panic attacks. And that's probably the panic trying to come through. And it's really who can hold the space for those emotions to come through. Also, it's time consuming. So I've been on this path for 2 years. There's still I've still got a lot of that womb trauma with me. Appeared to block all emotions in my body for 42 years. So since I started going through this process, I have been in a continual process of releasing less severe emotions. It seemed as if they were layered, that the most extremes were at the top, and then they become more and more pleasant. But once you start this process, don't be surprised that it can take a long time for all the emotions to flow through. And another thing to consider is with high-dose chemo, particularly as you're being asked to feel the body, if the body's getting difficult treatments, it's also even more difficult to feel the pain of the chemo working through the body, or the treatments. And then finally, psychedelics do come with some risks. They do appear to be the quickest from studies, but I think it's worth everyone considering both meditation techniques like Qigong or esoteric yoga. I think if you do just bodily yoga, it doesn't really get to the crux of what you need to do. You need to go for more kind of nuanced Kundalini yoga experts who maybe are trained in a more deeper way. But I found if you find the right Qigong master, they've got a quite well-organized process to go through this.
We had several questions online. 2 were related to circulating tumor cells. I guess you mentioned that you had yours checked. And one said, where can you get it? Is there a test that you can get, CTC tests, even if you don't have a solid tumor? And the other person wanted to know the name of the CTC test.
And there's quite a few companies now. The first place I would start is looking for clinicaltrials.com and seeing if there's a trial doing it, because then you get it for free. And then there's companies like Data, NextGen, RGCC that do it that I'm aware of.
One person online just asked, are you now free from cancer?
It's a very good question. The last CTC test was 0. and my CEA is lower than it was pre-diagnosis. So yeah, I feel fitter than I've ever done, emotionally and physically. But yeah, it's difficult to say never in this game. But I mean, it's a deep debate in the people I work with. A lot of people believe it's a process, not a yes or no switch. That's it. Thank you very much.
Don't take it, don't. 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 Don't take it, don't.
The river is a healer. The river is a sage. The river knows no end, and the river feels no way.